Prime Minister Mark Carney recently announced new measures for the auto industry. The government is scrapping electric vehicle mandates. Instead, Ottawa is bringing back consumer incentives. The aim is to make electric vehicles more affordable and reliable for Canadians. And to find out what this means for people here who are thinking of buying an EV, we're joined by some folks who follow this industry closely. So today on Blue Sky, we want to know, do you have questions about driving EVs in Saskatchewan? Does an incentive make you more likely to buy an EV? And what would it take to get you to switch to a zero-emissions vehicle? You can call 1-800-716-2221 or you can email bluesky@cbc.ca. Our guests today follow the auto industry closely. Greg Layson is the digital and mobile editor for Automotive News Canada. Greg, welcome to Blue Sky.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. And Tyler Krause is the Sask on the Sask EV board. He's president of the Tesla Owners Club of Saskatchewan, and he's in our Saskatoon studio. Tyler, welcome back to Blue Sky.
Yeah, thanks for having me as well.
So, Greg, let's just start with what was the electrical vehicle mandate?
So the previous mandate was very target-driven, hard numbers focused. So, for example, in 2026, automakers had to ensure that 20% of their new vehicle sales in that model year were zero-emissions vehicles. So if they sold 100, 20 of them had to be a qualifying zero-emissions vehicles. Automakers hated that because it meant they had to sell a particular number of vehicles, and that was difficult to do given market conditions and demand and technology. And so now the new mandate is not a mandate at all. Instead, it is more stringent and strict tailpipe emissions rules and regulations. Now, we don't exactly know what those are going to be yet, but the government is focusing on the emissions themselves. And so the idea is that all of the vehicles that an automaker sells must lower their average emissions. So if you sell 100,000 units, you have to make sure that those 100,000 units average tailpipe emissions of carbon dioxide is lowering each and every year. And the idea is that it allows automakers to sell everything from internal combustion engines, either a gas guzzling SUV that seats 8 or a subcompact car that seats 4. But at the same time, they can continue to sell EVs, work on EV technology, sell hybrids, and better that technology as well. It's a little more balanced and natural approach to how automakers have already been operating.
So how do you feel about this?
I think it's the best compromise that the government, the automakers, and advocates could come to. I think it is what automakers have always done, which is try to improve fuel efficiency and mileage, which in turn lowers how much fuel consumers need to use, which lowers how much emissions are put into the environment. It doesn't necessarily say EVs are dead. It just means they will move at a more natural pace, maybe meet the market demand where it's at for the time being. You know, we just had a story today that solid state batteries are making improvements. And so that is different than what's used right now. So the technology continues to evolve. And that's what the automakers have always said. Stop asking us to sell a particular number of electric vehicles and invest in a particular type of technology when the technology continues to change at such a rapid pace. So I think it's the best compromise for all involved.
How effective do you think this is for reducing emissions?
That's the big question. I mean, even the government, by its own admission, when it made this announcement a little while ago, wasn't so sure how much this new policy was going to lower emissions. What you do know is if you put more electric vehicles on the road, it takes more internal combustion engines off the road, and you certainly would lower emissions. Now with a mix, it's going to be tough to say, and it's going to take years to know if this actually works. But the fact of the matter is automakers have been moving to hybrid powertrains, which lowers emissions in and of themselves. And so we've been going down this path. And so theoretically, this new approach should lower emissions, but they don't have upfront math to tell us by how much.
Tyler, what were your initial thoughts when you heard about this change?
Well, I mean, I'm glad that there's still some incentives, to help Canadians to afford an EV. Obviously, it's not as stringent. I think we're going to see a bit of reduction in adoption rates from what we had before. But it's still good. The one thing that I'm not really happy about is that this rebate or this incentive is going to decrease each year until 2030. And I think this is something that until auto manufacturers can really say for sure that, hey, we're going to reduce these prices so that an EV is equivalent to a gas car at their upfront cost. Until that happens, I mean, Canadians are still going to need that help. Right now, the number one reason why people are so hesitant to buy EVs in Canada, according to numerous surveys, is upfront costs. They're about $15,000 more than their gas counterparts.
Yeah, we have somebody on the line right now who wants to join the conversation. Rob, welcome to Blue Sky.
Hi, yes.
What's on your mind?
Well, the question was, what would it take to convince you to buy an EV? We bought an EV 4 years ago. We had all the concerns about, will it work in the wintertime? Will it be reliable? And is it really more energy efficient? And so we test drove one when it was about 35 below. We were very favorably impressed, but went home and still starting to doubt ourselves. And I waited till it was a similar day, and I went back. This was actually a Tesla that we bought. And I wanted to take another test drive. And they gave me a chance to take another test drive. I went there. We took a car that had been out in the cold, and they just used their phone to turn on the interior heaters on that thing for about 5 minutes. And I got into a warm car and took it for a second drive. And I said, this is it. Now, since then, we started out by making a trip out to Cape Breton, Nova Scotia. We didn't have any problems finding chargers. The car kind of guides you, as to when you need to go to the next charger and where it is. We saved on that trip. We figured, based on prices of gasoline at that time, we saved about $1,800 on that trip alone. We have yet to have a mechanical problem or service charge on anything on that car. After 4 years, we've been crisscrossed the country with it. The one caveat, when it is really cold outside, the range can be cut in half. But we started out by buying the extended range version, and I'm really thankful that we did. What would cause me to buy one? Why do people not buy one? I think there's all kinds of fears out there in this information. I am just so glad that we made the decision.
I mean, the range in half is a big thing for people, and probably the money. How much did it cost you?
It cost us, I think it was $68,000.
Yeah, which is probably out of a lot of people's realm of what they're looking to pay.
Yeah.
It
was out of our, I might say it was out of our range too. I mean, we had no clue that we would ever end up buying, paying that much for a car.
Rob, what pushed you over the edge then? Because was that without an incentive, or was that with an incentive?
No, we never got any incentive, actually. I like to pull up to chargers in Alberta, and you just automatically get out of the car and plug it in. You don't have to show your credit card or anything to the charger. It knows you. It will bill your credit card. But some Albertan driving up in a big truck will ask, how much does it cost? And I'll say it doesn't cost us anything. And, we got, tell them we got $10,000 incentive to buy the car. And, of course, they're ready to pull their guns out from behind the seat. But
you're just poking bears, are you? Well, Rob, I really appreciate you joining that conversation today. Yeah, and what are your thoughts on this? Like, do you think that this incentive, is it enough to get, some of the family and friends? I think EV people tend to be a bit evangelical. I'm sure we're not the first people that you've talked to about it. Is that incentive enough to get your family and friends to join the club?
I don't know. I honestly can't answer that. I am looking forward to, having some lower priced EVs. That said, for my own self, if I was going to be buying again, I have a few basic things I want. I want all-wheel drive. We were on an icy trip last weekend, and I'm glad I had all-wheel drive. And I want the extended range, because this car, Model 3 that we have, had a new range of 578 kilometers. Well, if I can only get half of that in the wintertime, that's, a little over around 300 kilometers.
And Rob, how much does it cost for the extended range?
I think it was about $10,000 extra.
For peace of mind.
Well, it's more than peace of mind. If I want to go up to Waskesiu, or like last winter, we cut straight across to Calgary on the way to Canmore, and the car was telling me to go down to Swift Current and follow the number 1 because there's more chargers along the number 1. But that was farther, and I didn't want to drive farther, so I decided to take a chance and cut straight across. We had a distance of 309 kilometers in February. Now, 309 shouldn't be any problem with our extended range. It certainly wouldn't be a problem in the summer. But in the winter, when your range could be cut in half, you're taking a little bit of a chance. So we slowed down to 95. We turned the heaters down a little bit, and we made it, with I think about 11% battery left. But without the extended range, you lose that kind of flexibility. So for us, it was a huge benefit. Time saver, peace of mind, all of that kind of thing.
You said you have a Tesla?
We have a Tesla, yes.
So I was wondering with Tyler, anybody on the call here, if anybody knows with the Chinese EVs that we're considering, is the extended range available on those ones?
We won't know.
I don't know.
Okay. Well, okay. You don't know, and we've got Greg Layson from Automotive News Canada on the line too. Greg, what do you know?
Yeah, we don't know exactly which brands are coming over from China immediately. It sounds like BYD would probably be the first to arrive. They do have that option. We don't know which makes and models they would be selling here yet. So there's still a little gray area of what exactly is coming from China when it comes to the Chinese EVs. And if 49,000 of them allowed, they do not qualify for a $5,000 electric vehicle incentive because they are not made in a country that has a free trade deal with Canada. So keep that in mind if you're a consumer. But they are supposed to arrive with an import price of $35,000 or less. Half of those are supposed to be priced that way. So they'll be cheaper. We don't know if they'll be extended range, and we don't know the makes and models yet, but we know 49,000 of them are on the way, $35,000 or less for import price for half of those, and they don't qualify for the $5,000 rebate.
Okay, well, thanks for that. And Rob, do you have anything else you want to add to the conversation before we let you go?
Yeah, I would, when I talk about extended range, if you're buying a car particularly to be, city driving and short trips, you don't need to worry about the extended range. I don't have a separate vehicle for that, and my car has to be able to make long trips. And as I said, we've gone right out to Nova Scotia, and we've gone to Vancouver a couple times. And so I wanted to have that extended range to give me the flexibility between chargers. I would like to see more chargers installed, and I'm glad to see that we're working towards that.
Thanks for bringing that up, Rob. I want to pick up on that with our guest today. So if other people want to join the conversation like Rob, you can call 1-800-716-2221 or email bluesky@cbc.ca. At 12:25, we're going to have an Olympic update. But in the next minute here, folks, I'd like to know, we just heard on the news, about a plan for 8,000 more charging stations for EVs. What difference does that make in terms of people's confidence in having an electric vehicle? Maybe, Tyler, I'll go with you.
Yeah, I mean, I think, like I mentioned earlier, I mean, the number one thing that was holding back Canadians from buying an EV was price. The number two is, of course, range anxiety and kind of a lack of confidence in charging infrastructure. You can't drive your EV if you can't charge it. And I think, we can go most areas with the EV, but it's a matter of, are there fast chargers available? Those are the chargers that you're going to be using, on your road trips. You going to Calgary or Edmonton or Winnipeg. And that's really, really important. And of course, we want to see those chargers not just in the major cities. Most of those have charging infrastructure now, but we want to see them in more of the rural communities. Our chargers right now, we kind of go from Estevan all the way up to Prince Albert, Shelbrooke. But beyond that, there's not really a lot going on in the northern parts of Saskatchewan or other provinces.
So definitely some room there for more infrastructure here in the province. I'm Nicole Huck, and you're listening to Blue Sky on CBC Radio 1. Today we're talking about changes to Canada's auto industry. The government is scrapping electric vehicle mandates. Instead, Ottawa is bringing back consumer incentives. We want to know what your thoughts are. Does this make you want to buy an electric vehicle? What would it take for you to make a switch to a zero-emissions car? You can call 1-800-716-2221, or you can email bluesky@cbc.ca. Our guests today are Tyler Krause, a Saskatchewan EV advocate, and Greg Layson, a journalist from Automotive News Canada. Gentlemen, we've seen these incentives before. I'm just curious about how prices are affected when there is an incentive. So, Greg, maybe you can talk to that.
Sure. So a couple of things. First, when there are incentives in place, there are electric vehicle sales. That is proven by studies and reports year after year. So if you have an EV rebate, you will have increased sales, full stop. When those rebates go away, as they did in Ontario in 2018, sales fell off a cliff. As they did at the federal level in 2025, about a year ago, sales fell off a cliff. They actually declined in every month, year over year, last year, except for December, because those numbers aren't out. And we didn't see an uptake month versus previous month until November. So it took 11 months for those to recover. So if you have rebates, you have sales. Now, here's the other thing. We've run stories. We found automakers that suddenly had a vehicle that price point didn't qualify for a rebate, so they lowered the price so it would qualify for a rebate. So in some cases, automakers could be baking in the price or the value of the federal incentive or provincial incentives into that sticker price to ensure an additional $5,000 or $4,000 or $7,000 in Quebec at one time. So it's possible that incentives aren't necessarily needed as much as everyone thinks they are. And I can tell you that in 2025, the cash incentives provided by automakers on average for electric vehicles was more than $11,000. And that was nearly double the cash incentives they offered in 2024 when there was an incentive. So they're still able to get $10,000 off that sticker price if you're a consumer.
And then how does that compare with the incentive being offered right now?
Right now, that was the 2025 number. If you were to get an internal combustion engine vehicle last year, you were looking at about $5,000 to $6,000 in incentives. So you actually get better incentives in 2025 on electric vehicles than you could on an internal combustion engine comparable. We don't have numbers yet in 2026. We're only about a month and 10 days into the selling season, into model year 2026. So we'll be looking for those at the end of the first quarter.
Tyler, how significant is the incentive? Like, how much do EVs cost right now, and what difference does that make a $5,000 or?
I mean, there's a huge range. It's like any vehicle. The range isn't as big with EVs as it is with gas cars. But I mean, we're looking at cars that, fully electric vehicles could be anywhere from, $40,000 upwards of, $200,000 or more. But, the average EV right now, especially those that are capable or appropriate for use in Saskatchewan, the ones that have that longer range, those EVs are averaging probably around $50,000 to $70,000. And, $5,000 does make a big difference. But one thing that I think a lot of consumers need to really consider, and one of our previous callers sort of touched on this, is the upfront cost is only part of the story here. You also have a lot of savings in gas and maintenance. And so for myself, I've had my Model 3 for about 7 years, and I've saved approximately $20,000 in gas after factoring in the cost of electricity. So if you include those savings,
I would whistle.
Yeah, it's a big number, and a lot
lot.
of people need to consider that. Yeah.
We have some questions from our listeners. Judy emailed, and she wants to know, how much does a new battery cost?
That's a really good question, actually. And as like any answer to that kind of question is going to be, it depends, right? It depends on the size of battery for that vehicle. But on average, the battery replacement cost right now can be anywhere from, about $10,000 up to $20,000, depending on the vehicle and the size of battery.
And do you expect, when you're buying an EV, are you expecting that you probably will be having to change the battery at some point?
No, absolutely not. And a lot of these manufacturers have very good warranty on the batteries. Not to say the battery is going to, fail right after the warranty expires, but a lot of manufacturers have warranties of 6-8 years, maybe 150 to 200,000 kilometers. And within that time period, you could easily put on enough kilometers to have enough gas savings that would, result in an equivalent cost of battery.
Judy also wants to know, can the battery go 10 hours?
Depends.
She
10
wants
hours
to go to,
doing what?
She wants to drive to Banff.
Sure. Yeah. So if you're driving to Banff, which I've done, dozens of times, I'm an avid snowboarder, and so we do a lot of trips to the mountains from Saskatoon here, and you won't be able to go without stopping in most virtually all EVs. You will have to stop a couple times on your way there. So I would tell people, on a typical highway drive on a mild day, you should be able to drive for about 2 to 3 hours in most of the EVs that are available on today's market. Of course, there's a lot of variables there, but that's the average.
And she wants to know, one last question, how much does a recharge cost, or a charge?
Yeah, so again, depends. So charging at home, in Saskatoon, we have a electricity rate of, I think it's like 17 cents a kilowatt hour right now. So for my long range vehicle, that would cost, about, let's say about $13. If you're on the road charging at the public charging infrastructure, because it's more convenient, because it's higher powered and it's quicker, those chargers have a higher cost, and that could be anywhere from, maybe $25 to $30, depending on the vehicle you're driving.
And we got an email from Ron, who's a bit more skeptical. He says Canadian consumers of electric vehicles naively think that they'll be able to recharge the EV battery at home instead of an extended wait time at recharging stations. If all homeowners convert to EV, the electrical grid as it now exists will be overloaded, including the transformers. Furthermore, many homes will need to upgrade their electrical panel to 200 amps at their own cost, which can be a few $1,000s to meet their entire household demand, including air conditioning or other services, and of course the electric vehicles. Germany planned for an upgrade and expansion of their electrical infrastructure and charging stations for electric vehicles in advance of eliminating the internal combustion engines by 2036. Perhaps we should do the same instead of putting the cart before the horse. And that came to us from Ron in Saskatoon. You look like you're chomping at the bit there, Tyler.
Yeah, I mean, this is a comment or a concern that we hear a lot, and I think that there's some validity there. There's also some misconceptions in that comment. So first of all, I think there's a comment about potentially needing to upgrade a panel because you have to have a 200 amp service, and that's not true. I mean, these electric vehicles can charge on a regular 110 volt outlet. It just takes a very long time to do that. People who have a panel, they want to have a 220 volt added onto that panel for EV charging. Maybe they don't have room. One thing that you can do, which is what I've done, is put on a splitter. So you can use that splitter so that when you're not pulling power from one of your other 220 volt devices, whether it's a dryer or a welder or something else, you can now power that or take that power to your vehicle to charge it. Or if you have multiple EVs, you can kind of split that. So there's other things that you can do to accommodate for that. You don't have to put in a 100 amp charger in your house. You can use a regular stove or a welder plug. The other misconception is that the grid can't handle EV adoption. And I think although it's correct that if everyone did this overnight, the grid would have a problem, I think we have to realize that, number one, this is something that's happening very slowly, right? I've had my EV for 8 years now, and we only have a couple thousand in the province since then. And Sask Power and Saskatoon Light Power, they're aware of this phenomenon that's happening, this adoption of electric vehicles, and they're preparing for that by doing studies with local EV drivers to monitor their charging habits. They're looking at their grid capacities, and they're preparing for this. And every time I've spoken with them, they've said that they have more concerns with new developments, new neighborhoods than they do with EV adoption. It's no different than back in the day. We didn't have a lot of electricity usage, and look at us now. Everything's powered electricity. electricity. We have, 220 volts power to our stoves and our dryers and all kinds of things. And we're able to keep up with it because the grid was able to kind of improve over time. And then that's exactly what's going to happen here.
I'm interested, Greg, in bringing you back into this conversation. How can Canadian automakers compete with the Chinese-made EVs? I mean, the Prime Minister also talked about rewarding automakers for building in Canada. How do those two things exist at the same time?
I would start by saying this. It's not necessarily Canadian automakers. So there's this myth that we have our own automakers. We don't. We have factories that are owned by multinational corporations or Detroit-based, Michigan-based automakers. So we don't have our own automaker, which puts us at a disadvantage because we don't have skin in the game. So that's where I start. Now, what I would say is North American automakers cannot compete with Chinese electric vehicles. And there are several reasons why, and I'll sort of list them as quickly as I can. One, China has a 15 to 20-year head start on the world when it comes to electric vehicles. They have the world's biggest stores of critical minerals needed for these vehicles, and they've been mining them much longer than we've even been thinking about getting them out of the ground. So they have that at their disposal. They have supply chains in place. We are trying to replace a 125-year internal combustion engine supply chain in North America with something for electric vehicles. That takes time. The Chinese are ahead of us. The Chinese then also use cheap electricity derived from coal for about 60% of their electricity, round numbers sake. They have lax or no labor laws, so they don't make a lot of money, the employees in these factories. They don't have environmental laws the way we do. And so they have all of these advantages that keep the prices low. They also, by the way, are backed for the most part by state funds. So a lot of these automakers, the tariffs don't matter to them because the Chinese government will just continue to fund them. So they will always undercut North American prices. And that is what the concern is. It is good for the consumer. Don't get me wrong. And they are quality vehicles. Make no mistake about it. But they are in direct competition with a North American auto industry that cannot compete financially with what's happening in China and what's being shipped from there to here.
I mean, we're only allowing 49,000 of these Chinese electric vehicles. Do we have a sense of what even would the number be for other non-Chinese electric vehicles sold in Canada?
So to put it in perspective, that 49,000 is about 2.6% of all vehicles sold in 2025. So it's not a huge number. It won't immediately have an effect on the North American auto industry. And by all means, if people want to buy them, they're more than welcome to buy them. Obviously, their quality, as I said, and they won't eat into North American production or take away North American jobs. The problem is when you become someone like Hyundai, for example, which sells 147,000 new vehicles in Canada and has zero footprint here and a very small footprint in America. That means North Americans are buying those vehicles from overseas and they're not turning that into jobs within the economy other than at dealerships. So that's the concern the auto industry has, is that does 49,000 end up being 150,000 at some point with no manufacturing footprint in either Canada or the United States? Because there is a way to manufacture Chinese vehicles in the United States and Canada to benefit because we have the critical minerals, because we have the refinement process, because we have the supply chain.
Could we see China or Germany setting up shop here and building them here in Canada? Yeah,
so right now, I mean, Stellantis just sold its stake in Nexstar, a battery factory in Windsor, Ontario.
Who is that?
Nexstar is a joint venture between LG Energy Solution out of Korea and Stellantis. Stellantis sold its 49% stake just last week. They're out of the battery game. But that now allows that company to sell EV batteries to any automaker in North America, not exclusively to Stellantis. In sticking with Stellantis, they have a partnership with Leap Motor Company in China. And so it is realistic and feasible and plausible to think that Leap Motors could use an empty Stellantis plant in Brampton right now to make Leap Motor branded vehicles there for the North American market. So it is not out of the realm of possibility that any of these automakers, GM has 2 joint ventures in China and an empty factory in Ontario. So it's not out of the realm of possibility that a joint venture sets up shop in Canada where the United States and Canadian governments can sort of monitor the safety, the security, and the quality of the Chinese brands. And then at the same time, those brands employ Canadians and Americans alike.
Well, you know a lot.
It is my job. I've got to be on top of this stuff.
Oh, it's great. I want to bring in some more of our listeners here. Keith had emailed and he said, we have a 2014 EV with over 240,000 kilometers of Saskatchewan driving. It's been in the shop never. No oil changes, no gas, no radiator or transmission, and so many less moving parts to fail compared to a fuel-burning vehicle. Show me a 12-year-old gas vehicle that has never been in the shop. One more good reason to consider buying an EV. Naysayers should educate themselves on the effects and not the opinion. And he emailed again to say that they bought it used for $35,000, and he said that it's not being evangelical to save money. So thanks for that, Keith. We also got an email from Mike who says, I'd like to buy one. I'll probably buy a used one in Vancouver and bring it here. But here are some of the costs before I even get to drive it. $300 per year Sask road tax. Even though we will be buying electricity from Sask Power, $150 plus any repairs needed for the used car inspection from out of province, and $1,000 to transport to Saskatoon. Let's pick up on that $300 per year Saskatchewan road tax. While other folks in other provinces and other countries are doing some incentives to get people on the road, we're not. What's going on here, Tyler?
Yeah, so we were, I worked with Sask EV and some other organizations, in other provinces to actually fight this EV tax back when it was first introduced. And it started out as only $150, and now it's up to $300, which is awful. We were the first province to do this, and we also have one of the lowest adoption rates. So it really made no sense. and if you factor in the fact that, we're paying into the coffers of the provincial government because we're using, outside of the city of Saskatoon, we're using essentially power from a Crown Corp, right? So right now, people who aren't charging in Saskatoon are actually paying more to the government than gas car drivers are paying through gas tax. So it's really unfair and awful, and it really disincentivizes something that has a measurable benefit on society. There was a study in Ontario done a few years ago that showed for every gas vehicle that was, changed over to an EV, there is a societal benefit of about $10,000, and that was because of a reduction in pollution.
Wow. If people want to join the conversation, there still is time. You can call 1-800-716-2221, or you can email bluesky@cbc.ca. I want to talk about what other countries are doing, because I think it is interesting. So if people are interested in this topic, What on Earth, a CBC show about climate solutions, had a really interesting show on the weekend. And they went to Norway to find out what was happening there. Norway, another, cold weather country. And she asked about targets and the importance of it. Because in Norway, they have a 96% adoption rate. So I don't think there's time for us to hear that interview right now, but I do want to ask you about it. So Greg, what did Norway do when it comes to getting people to switch to EVs? 96%, that's a lot.
Yeah, I mean, Norway had a lot of incentives, not just purchase incentives and tax breaks and all these things, but, free toll, free parking, all kinds of advantages if you bought an electric vehicle. And, Norway, I understand why everyone wants to talk about Norway. And I mean, even General Motors went there a few years ago for a Super Bowl ad with Will Ferrell to talk about Norway's EV adoption. It is world renowned. There's no question about it. But I do want to caution everyone about Norway in that their geography is different than ours. Their population density is different. They don't have an automaker, so they don't have a skin in the game. We have a very massive car culture in North America. And so those things that Norway did, I would love free parking if I had an EV. I would love EV incentives and rebates. I would love to not have to pay toll if I had an EV. I think those things would go a long way to encourage people to buy an electric vehicle. I also think you have to take into account your geography, your daily commute. Rural Saskatchewan is much different than Metro Toronto, for example. The size of vehicle you need is different. The distance you travel is different. But I do want to say one thing, and we talked about those traveling distances. On average, a Canadian travels about 80 kilometers a day. any EV that's in the market right now, and there's 115 of them in Canada, they'll suit your purpose. So I think Norway did a lot of good things on the around the edges that also encourage people to buy EVs. And I mean, I assume, Tyler, you would agree.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think there are definitely differences. Although I would argue that that those differences really just come down to economics, right? We do have different geography here, but
it was also taxes, though, right? Like they taxed the heck out of anything that wasn't a zero emission vehicle. So they made it so that it was the cheaper option, and I just don't see that happening here.
No, and well, in a way, and this is what we heard Pierre Poilievre say, is that the EV rebates were a tax because it would force automakers to sell more internal combustion engines and be penalized for doing so. If you remember the previous mandate, there were essentially a tax on the automakers if they sold too few EVs. So while the consumer got the benefit for $5,000, the automaker paid a penalty if he didn't hit 20% sales target. So that, where does that money transfer? Down to the sticker price. So you and I were going to pay more for an internal combustion engine in Canada in 2026 and beyond if automakers didn't hit their targets. And automakers were not going to hit their targets unless they were Tesla, Rivian, Lucid, VinFast, EV-only automakers.
I do want to talk about, okay, I'm just going to bring myself into the conversation here. I've got 4 kids. We're driving a minivan. And I would never consider buying a new vehicle because I, like Mike and the other folks, prefer used if possible. What's even on the market? Can you make a environmentally, friendly choice if you're driving minivans? And what's the used market like right now?
I would say this. My editor-in-chief, Jeff Melnichuk, and I are constantly looking on Marketplace and other online used sites such as AutoTrader, and the price of used EVs are ridiculously low compared to their sticker price.
Can you give me an example? I want numbers.
Yeah, we're talking like a Ford F-150 Lightning, for example, that typically sells anywhere from $78,000 to $110,000. We found them online 2 years old for less than half that price, in the $60,000 range, which is comparable to a new internal combustion engine F-150 or F-Series.
What is happening there?
So what's happening is people just either don't believe in them, they don't believe in their range, they find them maybe a hassle, they don't like what they have. Like my neighbor, this is an anecdote, and he bought an F-Series truck, got great range in the summer, didn't like it in the winter. We heard a caller saying it might be less than half. It is. Studies show that anywhere from 10 to 40% loss in battery range. And so some people don't like that in the winter, depending on what their lifestyle is and what they're using it for. So if you can find them out there, I have considered a used EV based just on those prices. We've seen half price Audis out there online for sale. We're digging into why that is. We're just starting the process of researching that story, but the prices are incredibly surprising to me. And I don't know if that's how it is with Teslas, Tyler, but I am shocked that I've seen 3 brands over the last month and a half or so where they're essentially half price.
Yeah, Teslas, their price has been fluctuating both for, political and technological reasons. Nicole, you said you wanted some hard numbers. Yeah. I got one on Kijiji here.
Lay it
Tesla
on
model Tesla Model Y long range, $40,000. So that's kind of what you're looking at for a used sort of SUV. 2022, so only a couple of years old. This one's got some kilometers on it, 90,000 kilometers, but you're still got lots of battery warranty left and lots of battery life left in that. And again, like I mentioned earlier, you got to factor in your gas savings too. So over the course of, another 5-6 years, depending on how much you're driving, your $40,000 vehicle, you might be saving $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 in gas.
We know that older vehicles are generally worse for emissions, but it's like that catch-22, right? It's sometimes it's the only thing people can afford. So if we want to get old vehicles off the road, Greg, what is the best way of doing this? How do we get old vehicles off the road?
Oh, goodness. The Cash for Clunkers program that several states in the United States have run, where you get a government rebate for your old internal combustion engine is incredibly successful. I think BC used to have a similar program where you could turn in your internal combustion engine vehicle, go buy something new and get a credit on top of a credit, on top of the federal rebate. That's the way to go about it. Pay the incentive or pay to get those internal combustion engine vehicles off the road. Now, I will say, I mean, technology has come so far in the last 20 years that, yes, older vehicles are always worse on fuel efficiency and worse polluters than any model year in 2026 vehicle, but they're not as bad as it used to be. But cash for clunkers programs have been proven to work. That's one way to do it. And just to piggyback on the pricing for used, if you're looking for a used vehicle, generally speaking, those prices were up 2% last year. They were up 4% on clutch. That sells a little more premium used, so newer and fewer kilometers, with average transaction prices of around $35,000. So if you can find a Tesla, as Tyler just did, for $40,000, you're right in the ballpark. Why wouldn't you go buy that versus a used internal combustion engine vehicle?
Tyler, you know, when EVs are in the news, and does it make more people in Saskatchewan join your group? Are you seeing more interest in building this community here in Saskatchewan?
You know, that's something we haven't really been able to track very well, the correlation between, EV adoption and how often EVs are in the news. But I think it definitely helps, having these sorts of segments, it gives us a chance to sort of dispel some myths, answer questions. Sask EV is an organization that really focuses on the EV community and educating the public, because the better we can educate people about EVs, the sooner and quicker they're going to adopt them. And Greg, what are you looking for in the next, couple weeks, months when it comes to the auto industry here in Canada?
Well, the red letter day is February 16th. That's when it sounds like the $5,000 federal rebate will be available. Although they said that would be as soon as it would be available. But anything within the first quarter and second quarter. So first quarter, I expect EV sales to increase based on the $5,000 incentive. And then second quarter is the major selling season for the auto industry, and then you're going to see everything in full swing. That $5,000 rebate, all the new models on the lots, all of the cash incentives from the automakers, because typically Canadians buy between April and the end of June. And so the next 4 or 5 months are critical for the auto industry, and I'm going to really be watching the numbers and the uptake of electric vehicles. One thing we didn't really touch on today, hybrids, you get a $2,500 rebate on those as well. And automakers, in particular Toyota, are all in on hybrid. They believe that, I think one of the callers, or maybe it was Tyler, said we put the cart before the horse. And I think the mandates and the forced purchases of EVs really did do that, whereas automakers wanted to go with hybrids first and bridge that gap. I'm really going to keep an eye on hybrid sales in 2026.
Training wheels. Okay, yes. Well, I really appreciate this today. We've been joined by Greg Layson. He's the digital and mobile editor for Automotive News Canada. Tyler Kraus, Sask EV president, board member and president of Tesla Owners of Saskatchewan.